Inside the egg, it felt the shell tremble as soil shifted under a sudden breeze. A thin crack ran along the side. Another push from inside split the shell. It slid out, wet and blinking. Its tiny leaf folded tight against its back. It felt the cool air and the soft shade over the nest. Nearby, a larger Bulbasaur pressed low and watched, ready to block the wind and shade the hatchlings. The newborn Bulbasaur lay in the clearing under the open sky. The ground felt soft and unstable. Water pooled in shallow dents from rain last night. It tried to stand, and its legs wobbled. Its skin stuck to the slick soil, and roots caught between its tiny toes. Moving was slow. Its small leaf could not pull much sunlight yet, and being stuck on wet ground left it cold and easy to see. Bulbasaur felt the weather change fast. Heavy drops began to fall, and strong gusts pushed the loose grass aside. She saw a Pidgeotto cross the grey sky above, and its shadow pass over the nest. She watched the hatchlings freeze as the wind shoved at their shelter. She smelled the wet air and tightened her stance. The rain blurred shapes and laid the grass flat, removing the thin cover over the hatchlings. The young Bulbasaur watched the mother shift and breathe low. She nudged them toward a clump of thicker grass at the edge of the clearing. The hatchling curled into the damp moss and folded its leaf down low. That small move changed the outline of the group against the ground. It did not solve everything, but it gave a darker, firmer patch where feet could grip. The young Bulbasaur watched as the mother used her bulk to shield the nest, pressing her body against the wind and pulling the hatchlings under her side. The young Bulbasaur stayed low and huddled close. Its leaf opened just enough to catch weak light through the clouds. The bulbs still drew a little energy in the grey weather. The group stayed tight and felt warm from the heat of their bodies, and from the small light the leaf held. She watched the shelter hold as the rain eased into a fine mist. She watched a Pidgeotto circle once more, then move on. The hatchlings began to nudge the moss and nearby seedlings, finding small bites of soft food and warm spots in the grass. She nosed each hatchling and moved them deeper into the grass when she saw a puddle creep too close. For now, the nest was safe and her plan had worked. The hatchling knew the day had not ended the risks. Sunlight came back in patches and the ground stayed uneven where roots poked up. It folded its leaf and listened to a distant rustle at the forest edge. The sound reminded it that learning to move and find shelter would take many small steps. Its mother stayed nearby and kept watch. It tested its legs again and prepared for another short, careful step. A small Bulbasaur stepped over a raised root and felt the ground tilt under its pad. It moved along a path between the open meadow and the shrub line. It saw sun patches where the others fed, and darker shadows where danger could hide. It watched younger Pokémon test longer steps here, and it knew every new stride mattered. Then, a distant cry split the air. The group tightened without a sound. Bulbasaur understood the day had changed. Moving now meant more than finding food. Uneven ground and open foraging exposed holes in their defense. Short legs and soft skin slowed their progress on slick stones and exposed roots. When they left moss and low plants, they lost immediate cover. A single misstep could leave one juvenile alone and unable to run before a fast attacker reached it. He watched a Fearow high above. It circled and then dived. Its wings sliced the air and pushed wind into his face. He saw a juvenile freeze with a mouthful of moss. The bird was too fast, and the young one was too slow to tuck the moss away. The reach and speed of the bird made every step dangerous. He felt pressure from above. He knew the group had to act fast. The dive opened a clear gap. The Bulbasaur saw the break and knew running straight would be easy for a hunter to predict. It stepped sideways instead of forward. It angled its bulb and leaf to scan the sky and the ground. It watched others widen the space between them. The gaps let them spot Attackers, coming from above, while still keeping the path in view. Small shifts in stance told it what the next move would be. The juvenile watched a long-bodied arbok slide out of the low brush along the path, drawn by the sudden movement. He saw the other young adopt new habits. They took quick sideways steps, kept loose spacing, and tucked down into low cover under thorny shrubs. Each body angled low to protect exposed skin and limbs. With the mother not close, the juvenile relied on these coordinated patterns to stay mobile and stay with the group. The young Bulbasaur watched the arbok strike and then pause. It saw the snake fail to lock onto a single target because the circle kept shifting. A nearby Bulbasaur scraped a small cut on a pad, dove into the thick grass, and kept moving. For now, the plan worked. It had watched the group sidestep, keep distance, and use low cover. Those moves cut down on successful strikes and let the juveniles keep feeding. He moved on, practicing sidesteps over the stones and keeping small gaps between him and the others. He expected the world to test them again with speed and reach. He knew rougher paths lay ahead. Each repeated step made him steadier. He understood these early lessons would shape. Ivysaur moved more slowly than before. His stem had thickened and his leaves had grown wider, but the ground had hardened. The meadow was turning into a rough area of compact soil and low logs at the edge of the woods. Each step took effort. He felt the resistance under his roots, and knew the day would demand more from his body. Ivysaur faced one steady danger. The soil held less water, and the low plants had thinned. He could not reach moisture where he usually grazed. Root tips slid over a dry crust, and food patches were smaller and farther apart. Each bite cost energy, and each step could make him slip on the tighter, shallower ground. Ivysaur knew the season had been dry for weeks, and the meadow cover had dropped. Low moss and seedlings were shriveled. He saw onyx move under the nearby ridge and felt small tremors through the soil. The tremors broke thin crusts and exposed roots. He had to pause more often. His legs tightened and his roots probed deeper with each step. The distance between good feeding patches kept growing. Ivysaur found a narrow opening beneath a fallen log. The soil there felt cooler and looser. He noticed a faint dampness lower down. It was not a stream, only a pocket of softer ground and older plant roots. That small change gave him a way to shift his movement pattern. Ivysaur felt the softer pocket under his roots and pressed them in. He widened his stance and planted his legs farther apart for balance. He pushed root tips into cracks and let the bulb draw the sparse water. He knew water was scarce, so he folded his larger leaves wider to shade the patch and slow evaporation. He fed more deliberately and saved energy between short pulls of foliage. Ivysaur tried a new tactic, and it worked for now. The shaded pocket stayed damp longer. He held his ground on the slope and watched the nearby soil dry. He pulled some food, rested, and let his stem thicken a little. The tremors from the ridge faded, and he kept his breathing low and steady, ready to move if the ground shifted again. Ivysaur knew the season would not end overnight. He saw stretches where the soil hardened and the plants grew thin. The patch he had found gave him a local advantage, not a final fix. He knew he would have to widen his root network and find more pockets like this as the meadow kept changing. The world ahead remained a test of steady adaptation. Ivysaur moved along the forest edge with heavier steps and a thicker stem. Fallen logs and shallow gullies marked its path. The stream at the edge hissed and threw spray. A low rumble came from the ridge above, and the ground under its feet trembled. Ivysaur felt the vibration through its roots and stopped. It waited, ready for whatever the ridge might send. Large predators now used the ridge and the waterline as patrol routes, and Ivysaur noticed the change when it went to feed. Today, it saw a tyranitar walking the high flank. The heavy steps knocked loose stones and tore at low shrubs. Ivysaur heard the clatter and watched cover pulled up where it fed, leaving patches of soft soil. Ivysaur relied on being rooted to the ground, so exposed soil and broken plants felt like real danger. Ivysaur stood by the stream and watched a Gyarados strike the water with broad tail swipes. Spray flew into the air with each hit. Waves tore moss from the banks and knocked over small saplings. Ivysaur saw the shade break up and the soil loosen where it had set its roots. It felt the ground shake. The noise and wet chop made the forest edge go from steady to unstable. Ivysaur changed its stance. It pressed its roots deeper into the log-strewn bank and spread its feet on the compact soil. Its leaves tilted lower and its stems stiffened. It watched and listened for small signs. Stones falling sounded different from a fin slapping water. Ivysaur learned to tell those sounds apart and used them to time each move. Ivysaur dug in and used its weight as a brace. Its roots spread under fallen logs and wrapped around exposed stones. When the ground loosened, it pushed with its shoulders and stem to hold the soil and plants in place. When it heard the stream and felt the spray, it slipped back into the dense understory, folding its leaves low to stay hidden and keep warmth and moisture. The tactics worked, at least for now. Ivysaur watched Tyranitar move along the ridge and did not see the hold it had set fail. Loose stones rolled past and did not drag its roots free. The stream calmed, and the torn moss began to catch again around the logs. Ivysaur stayed in its chosen feeding strip and felt the ground hold under its weight. The edge quieted, but the world kept moving. Ivysaur heard water running faster after each strike. It watched loose stones fall from the ridgelines. It listened to wind and water. It knew that staying rooted now meant being ready to move when the next threat arrived. Venusaur feels heavier in the meadow. The bulb and larger leaves add weight. After the recent rains, the ground gives under its feet. Each step sinks deeper than before. It knows a larger body needs firmer ground and water closer by. That makes today different and risky. The danger is simple and immediate to it. The bank edges are soft, and the seasonal ponds sit too low for its roots. Its heavy mass makes it sink where the soil is weak. The feeding patches that once held steady now sloof away. It understands that if it cannot reach deeper moisture, its leaves will dry, and any movement will cost too much energy. Venusaur knows the season makes things worse. He sees heavy soil compact after floods, and then crack when the sun returns. Pools shift location, and some hollows fill with silt. He notices the dense shrubs hold little surface water. He must walk farther between reliable water patches. Each longer move strains the bulb on his back and risks slipping into mud or over downed roots. Venusaur notices a small opening, a low hollow surrounded by thick sedge that stays dark and cool. It senses firmer soil under one front root. It hears a distant trickle under a fallen log and smells deeper water. The patch is narrow, but it looks like a place to try a new approach. This single find makes Venusaur change its plan from roaming to staying in one spot. Venusaur feels its weight and stronger roots shaping the ground. It presses its trunks and roots into a hollow, widening the depression until water pools. It feels the roots push deeper as they meet compact layers and wet soil below. Its large leaves spread over the soil to shade it and slow evaporation. By digging hard and shading the spot, Venusaur creates a steady, reachable source of moisture. She watches the depression hold water long enough for the low plants to revive. She sees leaves become turgid and the bulb refill a little each day. When she steps onto the patch, her feet find firmer ground, and she sinks less. She notices nearby seedlings sheltering in the shade. She understands the modification is working for now, and the immediate need for steady feeding and deeper water is met. Venusaur watches the meadow and waits for the next flood or drought. It knows the land will shift again. It must widen its root network and do the work again in new places. It moves in short windows of time. It digs new hollows and spreads shade over new patches. The task is survival. It keeps water within reach as the meadow changes. The meadow went quiet and the air felt heavy. Venusaur sensed the ground through its wide roots and listened for movement along the wet corridor of ponds. It had crossed this stretch in long strides for years, but today, the usual feeding patches were disturbed. Something large had passed recently and left a trail of churned mud and broken reeds. Venusaur tightened its stance and pressed its roots into the soil. Testing slowly which spots would hold its weight, Venusaur understood the main danger: the wide land and the large attackers that moved through it. Wide terrain meant long walks between secure feeding patches. Near water, heavy predators could collapse shallow banks and wash away the shaded hollows Venusaur relied on. Venusaur watched a waylord push through a seasonal pond, set off waves, and flatten nearby shelter plants. Venusaur's bulk needed stable ground, and the churned mud left fewer solid patches to stand on. Venusaur watched Rayquaza move high above. Strong gusts hit the meadow and tore at leaves and small branches. The wind stripped shade from several feeding spots and snapped young shrubs that sheltered seedlings. With shade gone, the ground dried faster, and small water pockets broke apart. Venusaur felt the sudden instability through its roots. The spaces between safe patches grew, and crossing the open meadow now risked exposure to aerial patrols and sudden storms. A brief calm followed the gusts. The wind eased, and the clouds thinned for a few hours. Venusaur noticed the change and moved away from the exposed ponds. It probed deeper soil under a band of old shrubs at the forest edge. The earth there was heavier and still held moisture. The understory still had intact leaves. Venusaur sensed a pattern. Short, reliable windows opened between storms. It knew movement would be safer if timed and deliberate. Venusaur widened its root network into the heavy loam to lock itself to firm ground. It used its weight to press shallow depressions that held rain and formed small stable ponds where roots could drink between storms. Big leaves spread over those ponds to shade them and slow evaporation. When it had to move, it waited for short, calm periods and stepped in long, steady strides to the next shaded patch, rather than running across open ground. Venusaur knew the strategy worked for now. It saw shaded hollows holding water longer. It watched seedlings take root near the depressions and noticed small animals sheltering under the broad leaves. Venusaur took this as a sign that microhabitats were stabilizing. It stood on a compact ridge as the wind picked up again and felt its roots grip the soil it had reinforced. Venusaur saw predators still come and go. It understood that the patches it had created reduced the need for risky long moves across the exposed meadows. Venusaur found the world unpredictable. It saw seasonal floods return. It watched Waylord roam through the water corridors, and it watched Rayquaza fly high above. Its shaded pockets and long roots gave it an advantage now, but it understood this was only temporary in a changing landscape. It widened its root network and watched the sky and the water. The long journey to survive continued. It took one careful step and dug one depression at a time.